Welcome, everybody, to today's episode of the Empower Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Monos. Today's the first podcast of 2026. And then I know this has nothing to do with the podcast, but I just want to brag a little bit. It's my first podcast as a dad, and I'm pretty happy about that. So it's a pretty cool thing. Today, I have a guest, Ishan Hewa. He told me his full last name just before we started. A little difficult for me to pronounce. So he told me how he says it kind of shortened for professional purposes. He's pretty incredible. He does a lot with nutrition. He's a very intelligent man when it comes to coaching and training. I think one of his biggest successes that you can see on Instagram right now is a coach named Dylan Shannon, who's an absolute unit. And he's blown up recently too. But it's a real treat to have somebody with this education on aspects of training that some people don't understand quite well. He's done topics such as TRT and peptides, talks about supplements and all that. And I think that's probably one of the main areas that coaches get asked questions and don't always feel the most prepared. So, Ishan, thank you for being on the show. And can you just do a quick background on what you do?
Yeah, so I'm a health and performance coach. I used to work with a lot more youth athletes, but right now my focus has shifted to a lot of people like yourself, other coaches or other, I guess, professionals that want to keep that athletic spark alive and they're going into their 30s, 40s. And I previously, while I was coaching, I used to work in supplement formulation. So I was a formulator for a big supplement brand. Helped launch a brand last year called the One of One Supplements. We partnered with Floyd Mayweather to make that. But right now, I work full time as a coach and doing my best to educate through social media as well on things like supplements. TRT, peptides. As is my background actually comes from molecular biology and neuroscience is what I was formally educated in, and I used to work in as an undergrad researcher in Alzheimer's. So had some background in dementia research, aging, and concussion research too, which I really got into because I used to play rugby at a high level, and as you know, that rugby, football, the whole concussion thing is kind of blown up in the last 15 years. But yeah, that's pretty much a big overview of what I do right now, what I've done in the past, and just want to thank you for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, so it's a really broad kind of background, and it touches on a lot of
Yeah,
topics,
yeah.
which I find is impressive. So I did want to ask about your athletic background. How did you just get into sports in general? Rugby was your big thing, and is that what led you into coaching and training?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I initially started off in martial arts when I was a kid, worked my way up, getting my black belt in karate. I actually traveled to Japan for a month when I was in high school and trained. And then at the same time, I got into rugby and I was a fat kid. That was I guess everyone has something from when they're a kid, like pushing them to get into sports. And I was a fat kid. I wasn't the most athletic. So I just started working really hard to not be a fat kid and kind of build that up. I got into rugby in Canada and North America. I know you're in the US. People get into rugby at a lot later of an age than, some of the Commonwealth countries. So I got into rugby when I was 15. There's a lot of my friends that got into rugby were the kind of kids that a little bit nerdy, played Dungeons and Dragons and played video games. And, I turns out I excelled at the sport. So I went to university to play, probably one of the top universities in Canada to play rugby. I was a walk on. And what got me into coaching was I was working my ass off trying to, make the varsity squad because I wanted to go pro. We had a few guys from our squad that went to the Rugby World Cup, and I wanted to get to that level. I wanted to get a pro contract. Like that's the future I saw for myself. And at the same time, I was kind of was finishing up my pre-med, so I was doing my neuro degree, and I saw what a lot of the guys were doing as far as training goes, and the training quality just wasn't there. Like I was spinning my wheels, doing things like you name it. Like I won my first off season. I did P9 to train. I don't know if you ever heard of that
Yeah,
program,
yeah,
but I was doing bodybuilding programs because when I first got into training in high school, I remember walking to my local supplement store and seeing like I remember this distinctly. It was this fitness magazine, and on the cover was the tight end Vernon Davis,
yeah.
and they were talking about all his stats in there, and how he ran like a 4.3. I don't know if any of these stats were real, by the way. It's just what was in the magazine, right? Um, and he just looked like a total freak, running a 4.340, squatting like 800 pounds, benching over 400. You're like, okay, this is nuts. So I started doing these bodybuilding programs while I was training for rugby. and like German volume training, and like I would do the whole like hardcore train twice a day sort of thing. And, I made a ton of progress, but it was probably in spite of what I was doing, like probably a little bit of what I was doing, but it felt like I was working so incredibly hard. And I would just see some of these other guys that didn't work nearly as hard, like they weren't doing the 2 a day train or anything crazy like that. And they were just maybe they were just better athletes overall. But I realized later, I was like, wow, I was training like a complete idiot for my sport. I had no idea what I was doing. So, and then even nutrition wise, I was not eating enough to fuel my performance. So I was constantly feeling burnt out, constantly feeling stressed, in pain, um, abusing painkillers like crazy. So something that got me into coaching was like, okay, like what are the actual needle movers when it comes to performance to actually getting better, not just from the training standpoint, but from more holistic point of view, right? And understanding how the nervous system outside of training also plays a part in how
Mhm.
well you can perform, right? How we can modulate the nervous system to improve performance. Because you see guys that are, going it, just using rugby as an example, you see guys that are you in a change room. You have also different sorts of personalities or different types of guys who are trying to hype themselves up, and then you get the
Uh,
guys, the cooler heads that always do really well when they step onto the field, right? Like the ones that the play kind of slows down for them. They just do things and see things that they do in practice really easily, and then they replicate it on the field, right? And I wanted to understand a little bit more about that and how, the nervous system facilitates that, right? Because you can have a guy that like can do great in practice, but then when it comes to game time, it's like they freeze up a little bit, and everything that you learned in practice, all those drills and everything, kind of go out the window as soon as you step onto the game when it's game time, right? So understanding that as well and how that plays a part in performance, because I didn't want to just help younger athletes facilitate, to understand how they could train better, but also how they could adapt their mind to actually perform when it came
Mhm.
time to.
So I think that's an interesting thing. We have a lot of similarities, by the way. First of all, when you talked about the rugby thing and the nerdy thing, my brother played rugby at West Virginia University, and he not D&D so much as more Magic. The cards
Yep.
are his big thing. But then you're talking about, martial arts and all that. That was my early thing. And then I took a lot of time off. When I was in elementary school, people made fun of me because they said, karate's kind of nerdy. I actually did taekwondo instead, but they're like, that's kind of nerdy and all that. I'm like, okay. So I just started playing soccer because that's what everybody else played. And then I actually got a passion for that, but it was more out of spite because people were like, you're bad. And I was like, I'm tired of people saying that I'm really bad at this. So I'm going to work really hard to prove everybody wrong. I started playing at 9 when people, start with, they're at 5, they'll start kicking a ball, and I started playing competitively at 13. And then I just wanted to be better than everybody said I was bad. And so I was the only person from my high school to play college soccer from my graduating class, which was nice because I got to beat those people. But then I had the aspirations of playing professionally as well, and I didn't achieve a very high level. And part of it was similar to what you're talking about. It's the mental side and it's the physical side. It's like you're almost carrying too much. You're putting too much pressure on yourself. You're almost
Yeah.
holding yourself back. And from a physical side, yeah, you're talking about like P90X and all that stuff. And, we had the little DVD and I would do, all these like crazy burning sort of little workouts and all this stuff. It's not like the best for sports performance. It hurts and cool, you survived, but there's definitely like a smarter way to train it. Even when I was a college athlete, we didn't have a good strength coach at our school. And so I had a gym in town, and the owner gave me the key to the gym, didn't make me pay a membership, said I could go in and make sure I just lock up at night. So I'd go be like 11 o'clock at night, no one's in the gym. And it's this like dusty, kind of like, Rocky Balboa style gym. And
Yeah.
I'm just crushing like hammer curls and skull crushers and all that stuff, and it's not translating to my soccer performance. Who'd have thought? Um, and so like it just wasn't the smartest thing ever. And I was just doing super high volume. And I was doing, we had 4 practices a week together as a team, 2 games a week. I would do at least 3 individuals like skill sessions. I'd go to the gym 4 or 5 nights a week and all that stuff. And then I just never considered recovery and never considered nutrition. I would eat a lot, but I'd also skip breakfast. So sure, I had 2 AAA burritos and chips and guac for dinner, but I didn't
Yeah.
have breakfast. And I'm like, oh man, why am I not putting on weight? I just like, so all these different things. And it's interesting how you can care so much and still be, misguided a little bit in your efforts. And I don't know if it's the same for you, but for me, my thought was if I'm not going to make it, but I spent all this time trying to learn the secret, which there's not really a secret. It's just doing the basic things you hear all the time. How can I kind of pass this information to somebody else who might be in my shoes to make their
Right.
journey a little bit more efficient? And that's how I got into coaching. But it's interesting to see all the similarities you're talking about. the psychological side, I was a practice player because I actually had like a decent amount of skill and tactical understanding. Physically, I was okay, but it's the mental side that killed me because as soon as we go into games, I have so much pressure to make every pass the perfect pass, every
Right.
shot the perfect shot. For me, it wasn't good enough to score a goal. It had to be in the top corner off the post and all that stuff. I'm like, all right, well, my margin of error is much higher if I'm aiming for that very, very top corner and all that. But thinking I get style points if I score a beautiful goal and all that. And so it's interesting. And then like my wife, on the other hand, she was also a really high level soccer player, like you mentioned your wife was before the podcast. She was an All American honorable mention in soccer. She had the only shirt in her program's history retired. She was like
Oh,
the
wow.
captain. Yeah, which is pretty cool in college.
That's cool.
And so she was, a stud and all that stuff. But the thing that she did differently, she just like felt the game, like you're talking about. The game was in slow motion for her because she was in the moment. She wasn't thinking about what she was doing. She just like, I know I can play, put the ball at my foot. Good things are going to happen. And so
Yeah.
it's interesting to learn that. I did want to talk to you about, so you talked about Alzheimer's, you talked about concussion, and you talked about like brain health and all that stuff.
Yeah.
There's a lot of studies on supplements. You talked about that as well. That can help with that. Is it junk? Is there any validity? Is there anything that you've discovered in your time, something that can help prevent against Alzheimer's or help with concussion or just help with brain health overall?
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there. So Alzheimer's is and dementia in general is a very it's is a terrible disease, right? Like it's
It's horrible.
and there's a lot of correlation between, with concussions and or
Mhm,
brain damage in general
mhm,
and the onset of dementia. And something else that people would be surprised to learn about was that there's even some evidence that PED use, so performance steroid
mhm.
use, could increase your risk factors for developing
Interesting.
things like dementia and Alzheimer's. So, as far as supplements are concerned, there is some an emerging area, right?
Mhm,
In general, are
mhm.
are relatively new. Like I know
Okay.
we talked about peptides, which are really, really new, but
Yeah.
even supplements in the grand scheme of things are relatively new, especially the research in supplements. It's only been really happening in the last like 15, 20 years, right? And while you have some studies that are showing positive outcomes from supplement use, it's really hard because look at something like dementia and Alzheimer's because it's something that develops over several years or, the lifespan, right? So it's hard to look at research, and especially with supplements, and kind of draw any conclusions insofar as is it preventative, right? Because studies can only last so long. Like even with the lab that I worked in, we were looking at early signs of cognitive aging, and what we did was look at reaction times of
Okay.
people in their mid
Mhm,
to 50s and look at their variability of those reaction times over, I think it was about 400 plus trials.
mhm,
And we'd follow participants for years. This is a longitudinal study, so it was over five, I believe, 5 years. So it's hard to use supplements in that context, right? Because you have to hope that the individual is using those supplements every day,
yeah. Yeah.
and there's only so much you can control, right? In our research setting, in our context, they would just come in, for an hour and do the trials or however long it took, which is around, 45 minutes to an hour. And it's like, okay, we gathered the data we need to gather. You can go now, right? And then we'll see you in, 6 months or something, or a couple months. So is there validity to some of the supplements? Yes. Like we're seeing emerging evidence now, like people are starting to recognize things like creatine can really help, right? Because one thing that's compromised in concussions and potentially compromised in Alzheimer's is the processing of glucose to convert to ATP.
Mhm,
If there's neurodegeneration, how metabolically healthy is the brain tissue and how well can it convert those energy substrates into usable energy, into ATP? So,
mhm,
ATP, that's the exact pathway that creatine works on. So, creatine can actually be a substrate that provides energy
mhm,
in the context of something like Alzheimer's or someone
mhm,
who has a concussion too. So that we've seen positive outcomes from people who take high dose creatines in concussion recovery as well, right? So there are some other supplements as well that we're getting more evidence for. One thing that I've talked about on my social media are exogenous ketones.
okay.
So you've probably heard of the ketogenic diet. A lot of people have, Atkins or very low carb diets. I think there's some misunderstanding because there's a difference between a very low carb diet and a ketogenic diet. Well, a very low carb diet, you just reduce your carb intake, but a ketogenic diet also means that you consume a lot of fat. in your diet, and a lot more polyunsaturated fat. You'll see people who've done keto and they're just eating like cheese and mayo and whole eggs and whole beef, and it's like, well, I guess technically that's a keto diet, but it's probably the unhealthiest way to do a keto diet, right? But what a ketogenic diet is, it forces your body to into a ketogenic state. So there's low carbohydrate availability. So, which is carbohydrates are a highly efficient fuel source, which is why they're great for performance, right? Your body can convert it relatively fast into ATP, which is why you have dextrose or, any sort of carb drink is utilized, Gatorade utilized in training. Fat does not convert that quickly to ATP, which is why it's a relatively inefficient fuel source. However, ketones are an efficient fuel source. In fact, in the presence of both ketones and carbohydrates, your brain will tend to use ketones faster, right? So it's down the metabolic pathway from fat. So fat gets converted to ketones as a intermediary to ATP. So ketones themselves, they now they're finding in research ketones have a multitude of uses, exogenous ketones. So they can provide a quick substrate for energy for your brain. I actually took some ketones this morning. So these supplements have been around for at least a decade, maybe more. They're kind of making a reemergence right now, and it almost feels like rocket fuel for your brain. Like it'll really wake you up. I don't recommend anyone take it with caffeine if they are taking it for the first time, but a lot of those older supplements they underdosed when they were taking ketones. So if you're really to see any sort of noticeable effect, you really have to take at like probably 10 grams plus of a ketone supplement. So a lot of that research from before, there was products on the market like BPI used to have a product called Keto Creamer, and it was like a flavored uh MCT oil powder. And you get things like salted caramel. They actually tasted pretty good. They even filled them in Walmart for a short period of time. I used to own a supplement store back in like 2018, and we'd have them. But now these ones, it's not just MCT powder, which is still just you're just taking powdered fat and mixing it in. These are the actual ketones themselves, and what they've done is they bond it to things like calcium, magnesium, or sodium. So they're almost like you have the electrolytes as well bonded to them. So they're finding now that there's obviously the positive brain health benefits. You get some positive outcomes on performance. So some companies, there's a branded version called Go BHB. They're experimenting with mixing applications for like a carbohydrate powder for an intra-workout drink or pre-workout drink. Then they're finding now that it can actually potentially help with recovery. So there's one piece of research that I posted about talking about sleep metrics after strenuous exercise. So let's say that you're someone that trains in the evening, your sympathetic nervous system is still heightened, right? And that what that does is it might inhibit how good your sleep is because your sympathetic nervous system is still like in a heightened state. So you need some time to calm down from your training session, right? So your parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and digest system has to take over. And they found that with supplementing with ketones after a training session could actually modulate that shift in response. And they found that the sleep metrics improved after the ketone supplementation. So it's an interesting kind of supplement in the fact that, okay, it can be used for energy, but it can also help you
Having to
sleep.
sleep. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So it's why I'm a big fan of it, because I think one of the biggest compounds, one of the biggest supplements that, if you're in fitness, you've likely abused it or are abusing it right now is caffeine, right? Everyone's using caffeine, and now nicotine is the next thing because everyone's like, nicotine increases testosterone. I was like, it might for a short period, but if your nicotine use is turning into nicotine abuse, it's going to inhibit testosterone production. So when we look at problems like that, what everyone's using or abusing, it's like, okay, is there a better alternative? Is there something that can, elicit a response without the negative side effects? And that's, the problem with drugs is like you're always going to have a big
Sure.
side effect. But with supplements, it's like, okay, there might be a small side effect. How long before we start seeing those side effects, right? So like I said, the evidence on ketones is emerging, but there's a lot of potential there because it's basically a metabolic intermediary, right? It's not like it's essentially like a carbohydrate supplement. Now you're taking like a fat supplement per se. But I think that's another big one that I think that I would keep an eye out for,
Hmm.
insofar as brain health,
Hmm.
uh, because it was also studied in an Alzheimer's and dementia context, and they
Hmm.
actually found that it did reduce the symptoms of Alzheimer's. So it actually improved cognitive functioning. I can't remember the exact tests they used as a standardized form to measure what the cognitive functioning was, but they did find better functioning with exogenous ketone use.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
really
that's
interesting.
yeah, right. So I think that's definitely a really cool supplement. And there's some others that need more research. You know, Alzheimer's is also linked to inflammation. There's a supplement called curcumin, which is an extract from turmeric, which is the
Okay.
yellow spice. They found that that can be alleviate symptoms of anxiety and depression. And keep in
Hmm.
mind, this is like when we say that, it's like, okay, to what magnitude, right?
Sure.
Is it to the magnitude of an antidepressant? Probably not. In fact, definitely not. Well, you have to be very careful of the language you're using. And it's like, is it an acute effect or is it a chronic effect? 'Cause with things like fish oil, we
Hmm.
can see the effect after maybe a month of use, right? So, whereas like if you are diagnosed with clinical depression and take an SSRI, you're probably going to see an effect relatively soon,
Hmm.
right? And when we're looking at supplements that could potentially help against things like Alzheimer's or dementia, again, it's a chronic use thing. It's a long-term use thing. It's like
Hmm.
it's not an immediate effect use thing,
Hmm.
right? So it's something that I think is an interesting area of research, but it's hard to actually research.
I
Like I
think it's,
said,
oh yeah, well, it's not the exact same thing. I'm not trying to get super political, but in the States recently, Trump and his administration came out and said that like Tylenol causes autism, and everybody started freaking out. When you look into it, they're saying it's like, what is the actual correlation? I think it came down to like 3 to 6%. I'm like, how can you say 3 to 6% correlation is causation? It's not even close enough to even say that it's a significant difference. And then they're saying that it's difficult to do the studies with, they wanted to have twins, one with, one without, or something like as opposed to different families, because then there's different risk for autism just from different genetics and all these things. So when
right?
you're talking about like you did your studies for like Alzheimer's, you have to make sure that people are, taking the medication they're asking them and taking all that stuff. So there's a lot of confounding variables in a lot of these studies. I don't have to go specifically down that autism sort of route and all that, but
Yeah,
I do find that the science of supplements can be difficult. And then I also find it can be confusing for people too when it comes to the sales of supplements because they're going to have different promises. Someone can say it helps with some sort of supplement can help with sleep, for example. Maybe it has like a 10% benefit just to create like a BS number and all that stuff. They're gonna say improve your sleep twofold or whatever just to sell the
yeah,
supplement. And so people ask me about supplements all the time. I'm not an expert in the field. I tend to just recommend the ones that are considered to be safe and have a lot of research behind them. So creatine, protein powder, caffeine. If you just use it, for like a performance sort of boost, depending on not all the time, of course, because then you develop like what's the word I'm looking for, tolerance, and then it doesn't make a difference. And then I say like if you need all the extra stuff, you can get blood work done. You can see where you have deficiencies and all that. But my general thing with supplements is, and it's a big shocker, they're supplemental. They shouldn't be. You go to GNC and you spend an insane amount of money and you have all the supplements and you just have a tub of ice cream for dinner and nothing.
yeah,
It's for me, it's like if you're taking care of everything properly, your sleep, your nutrition's good, you're training properly and all that stuff, and then you still find you need help, I think supplements can be beneficial in that context. But you have some people that, again, I'm going down a different rabbit hole, will take Ozempic, get off Ozempic, gain all the way back because they didn't want any lifestyle changes in the meantime. And they're
yeah,
fighting because people are hopped up on caffeine because they had way too much, way too late in the day. They're like, man, I need this melatonin. Then they wake up, they're super groggy. They're like, man, I need caffeine, as
yeah.
opposed to just proper regulation and lifestyle habits. So can you speak to the actual importance of supplements? How you think people should view them? Which ones you think you generally recommend versus they should stay away from? That whole side of things.
Yeah. Oh, well, I just want to mention, it's funny that you mentioned GNC. I used to be a sales guy at GNC when I was doing my undergrad. So I'd literally see people walk in from the food court
Mhm.
with Blizzard, eating
Uh-huh.
the Blizzard while looking at the wall of fat burners. So
Yeah.
it was, yeah, no, that's a great question. I think, and I will lay out this hot take. I think a lot of people take supplements to make themselves feel like they're doing something to be healthy while not actually being healthy. So it's a nice little like pat on the back, like, well, I have all these supplements, so I'm definitely someone who is healthy. But
Yeah.
then their over focus on supplements means that they often neglect the actual things that make them healthy, which is having a whole food diet, or at least a
Mhm.
majority, I would say anywhere north of 80, I prefer 90% of
Uh-huh.
your calories coming from whole foods, making sure that you actually have a regular meal schedule. I
Mhm.
think the timing of meals is something that's often overlooked because it helps regulate your sleep wake cycle as well. You talked
Uh-huh.
about sleep and caffeine
Mhm.
and melatonin. The timing of your food is also really important for regulating your sleep wake cycle. So in the grand scheme of things, supplements are a very, they should be minutia in your overall routine. And it's not to say they
Mhm.
can't be beneficial, but it should be based on having your overt focus should be on having a whole food diet
Mhm.
majority of the time. And then supplementing with key ones from there. And that's going to be supplemental ones are going to be the supplements you should be taking are going to be contextual. So I think a lot of people tend to be deficient. One of the big things, if you're an active individual, B vitamins are the big one, is something to supplement with. And the other one is magnesium, particularly magnesium glycinate, because magnesium is involved in over 300 reactions in your body, 300 plus metabolic reactions in your body. And you can get it from food, but I think in today's day and age where you're, someone who is a dad, a husband, you're working lots, you're
Mhm.
working, around the clock, dealing with people, and then you also have your own training and your own training goals around that.
Yeah.
Magnesium, things like water soluble vitamins like vitamin B, vitamin C too, to a
Mhm.
lesser degree, they get
Mhm.
depleted really easily. And then the other things that I would add on top of that are maybe vitamin D if you
Mhm.
are someone that doesn't live in a sunny area. So the further you get from the equator, the more your vitamin D, supplemental vitamin D intake should go up, particularly around the winter months, right? So I've had a lot of clients that I'm like, hey, well, let's up your vitamin D intake to maybe 5,000 IUs per day during December, January, February. And they're like, wow, I feel great. I no longer feel like I wake up groggy and kind of just down all the time, right?
Mhm.
And again, vitamin D, not an expensive supplement, right?
Mhm.
So I'd say those first two definitely,
Mhm.
vitamin D3 as well. And then the other one potentially is fish oil or an omega-3 supplement. If you're someone that doesn't consume fish at least a few times per week.
Mhm.
So, and we have some good evidence on fish oil and omega-3s making some broad improvements in health. So not just cardiovascular health, but neural health as well, brain health. They recommend it's recommended for pregnant women to consume a high DHA supplement, and high DHA can actually have some positive benefits for the formation of the brain of the kid in
Mhm.
utero. And I've even experimented with myself post concussion with high DHA fish oil can definitely improve functioning. Now that's more anecdotal. I don't know if there's a ton of research on DHA supplement post concussion, but I
Mhm.
wouldn't be surprised if it shows a positive net benefit for that
Mhm.
as well. So I
Mhm.
think for athletes, potentially using fish oil along with those
Mhm.
other supplements. And the other big one, obviously, we talked about creatine.
Mhm.
Everyone and their dog takes creatine. I don't think everyone has to take creatine to especially like I take like 15 to 20 grams per day
Mhm.
just for the cognitive benefits, but
Mhm.
I also don't consume a ton of red meat. So I think if you're someone that does consume beef or red meat on a regular basis, then your actual supplemental need for creatine will probably be a bit lower.
We got a beef farm down the street. I live in a small town, and I mean, we eat beef all the time. And I don't think that I just generally don't like creatine because I think the powder is very grainy, and then the gummies aren't the best in terms of efficacy and all that.
Yep.
So yeah, so I try to stay away from gummies, and I always I every year I'll get into, like, a little kick where it's like, "Alright, I'll try the creatine again," have, like, 3, drinks with the powder, I'm like, "This sucks," and then I
Yeah.
stopped doing but, as far as, like, you talked about, like, fish oils and all that stuff, I find at least in the American diet, people are under-consuming fish. I find it's a very healthy source of protein, and fats, and people don't consume it enough, and then as far as you talked about vitamin D, what's interesting too is, well, a couple of things. Do you know the basketball, like, performance trainer, Paul Favorites?
I've heard that name, but I'm not
He was
familiar with him.
James Harden's, trainer.
Okay.
One of the things he was saying is that he grew up in, like, Arizona where there's a lot of sun, but he said that he was in the gym, like, the whole day, so he barely actually got access to sunlight because he'd go in when it was dark, he'd come out when it was, dark and all that stuff, and he said that he would break his bones all the time, and he's like, "What's happening?" And he's like, "I just get all this artificial, I don't get real sunlight," and he says, "I think I have a vitamin D deficiency," and he said he started taking it religiously and hasn't broken a bone since or something like that, and that, again,
Oh,
could be
wow.
anecdotal, but it's interesting. I do understand the whole concept of where you are relative to the equator, but then also, like, what is your schedule? Do you actually get sunlight? If you get sunlight, that could be a beneficial thing. So it is interesting. And then was it also on your page? I was scrolling through it that you had one of your clients saying that their seasonal depression was affected by vitamin D supplementation.
Yeah, seasonal affective
Yeah.
disorder.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was
it
interesting.
was yeah, because again, like it's your vitamin D is synthesized in response to sunlight, right? You make
Mhm,
it endogenously in response to sunlight. It also helps modulate your sleep wake cycle, your circadian rhythm, right? So if
mhm,
you ideally you want to get outside around just after sunrise and then just before sunset, and that'll actually help you regulate your natural biorhythms. So, I mean, if you start waking up and going to bed at the same times every
mhm,
day, you will self-regulate to waking up and actually feeling awake at those times. The problem comes from modern societies. We our sleep times and wake times can be all over the place, right? Like
mhm,
maybe Monday to Friday, we're waking up super early at like 5, 6 o'clock and going to bed, while staring at the phone until like
mhm,
at like 11. But then on the weekend, you don't wake up till like 9 or 10 or something like that, and then
mhm,
going to bed maybe even later. So it's all over the place, and we're wondering why you're always tired. It's like, well, there's no regularity
mhm,
because you can train your own physiology to operate efficiently.
mhm.
It's just you're not doing it.
It's interesting that you say that because when it came to sleep, I had issues with sleep. I thought I had like insomnia or something like that. I even saw like a sleep specialist, and he's saying you might have mild sleep sorry, mild insomnia, but like a lot of it just comes down to your sleep habits. And one of the things that I realized you're talking about the sun regulating your sleep wake cycle was after I graduated college, I graduated in 3 years. I was able to have a gap year. I moved in with Stone College, and we were in a house, and there were 6 people in a house that's only supposed to have 3 people. So we lied on the lease and all that stuff. I didn't realize this when I moved in. He said, "Oh, I got a room for you." It was like Harry Potter. It was a closet underneath the stairs, and it
Oh
had no
man,
windows. And my sleep was just destroyed by having no sunlight to wake me up or anything like that. So I actually had to invest in. It's a crazy product, but it's basically a lamp that dims over the course of an hour and then completely shuts off, and it like is supposed to give you the impression of the sun setting. And then as you wake up, it slowly like brightens and all that stuff. And that was the only thing to regulate my sleep with having no windows. And so when I had like bad sleep, one of the things is you know, before I lived in that house, I'd always have blackout curtains, but then I can sleep in because blackout
right.
curtains, if I keep my curtains open and the sun wakes me up, that helps regulate and it makes everything better. But it's one of those, you have to get ahead of it sort of decisions, not the reactive ones. I find that's what supplements are for a lot of people. It's kind of reactive. It's like, okay, I'm going to take fish oil as opposed to going to the grocery store and learning how to make a fish recipe and adding it once or twice a
Yep.
week. So yeah, I find that
Agree.
interesting.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, in comparing like fish, actually consuming fish to fish oil,
Mhm.
like you're way better off consuming fish because the
Sure.
problem with fish oil supplements, like, the problem with fish oil supplements is they're processed.
Mhm.
They use certain compounds to extract the fish oils and
Mhm.
also put them into the gels, right? And sometimes they like the triple strength fish oils and stuff. What they've done is it's gone through several processing steps in order to concentrate the fish oil so you're getting a high amount of EPA and DHA. But
Mhm.
the other problem is like the actual fish oils can go rancid themselves.
Mhm.
So that's not high quality fish oil
Yeah.
that you're getting relative to just buying fish and consuming fish, right? You're much better off. And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, like areas where there's higher fish consumption, there tends to be lower risk of cardiovascular disease. You're right. It's a and when I mentioned it was like my hot take, I'm like, yeah, I think that like, people like to take supplements
Mhm.
because they want to feel healthy, but they're not actually doing the big things to make them healthy, which is what
Mhm.
where their money should be better spent on those things, right?
I think the
Because
effect is real too in that.
very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. Like you see all these powders, like you can walk into a GNC or any supplement store right now and you can see all these different herbal supplements and you have no idea where to start, what all of these do.
Mhm.
Some of them might be efficacious, some of them not, but you also convince yourself that they are because now with access to podcasts like Huberman,
Mhm.
people will see, they talk about supplements. So like, because he helped everyone realizes like, okay, should I do ice baths? Should I, stare at the sun for 15 minutes every morning and like these different protocols and stuff,
Mhm.
right? So I think it's kind of like a double-edged sword. It's like, okay, it can
Mhm.
be good in one sense, but also like you can convince yourself that something is healthy when it's not actually beneficial, right? Like the ice bath thing is it people assumed it was great for recovery. It's like, well, it's actually just blunting soreness. It's not actually helping the muscle recover faster or build new tissue. It's just blunting the signals that make you feel sore.
Can we go down
So,
that a little bit? Because
yeah.
one of my pet peeves is how people will take words and make them like they'll bastardize them. They'll make them bad in every context. So you hear fats and it's like all fats are bad. I need to have like a diet with zero fats. And I'm like, no, there are healthy sources of fat. We're talking about fish. We're talking about like, I don't think someone's had avocado and then like felt like shit or something afterwards. But yeah, if you just like drink a glass of lard, that's probably not good for you. But then one of the things that you hear a lot is inflammation. Everybody's like, oh, like the key to all your health issues is inflammation, inflammation, inflammation. And I don't know if they're talking gut inflammation or just like of the joints or something like that. But the guy who created the protocol RICE, rest, ice, compression, elevation, then kind of denounced it later on saying, oh, I want to take back the whole ice thing because yes, it helps with inflammation. It helps with reducing swelling and all that stuff, but that swelling is actually a natural part of the healing process. So he said it actually delayed the healing process. And it's how people try to hack their bodies all the time. And sometimes your body's way smarter than you give it credit for. So when it comes to ice baths, I did it in college because it felt great. We're talking placebo effect. I felt like $1,000,000, even though I hated doing it in the moment. But then people talk about how it could potentially inhibit recovery. It could inhibit muscle growth to an extent. It maybe just be a placebo thing. And is it worth all that, torture? But then other people say it's worth it anyway, just for the mental clarity and the benefits and doing something tough. Can you kind of speak to, first of all, just the whole ice bath thing in general, but then also people talking about like inflammation or fats, how it's negative in all contexts?
Yeah, yeah. I'll touch on the ice bath thing really quickly because I think it's not to say that ice baths are bad or like
Mhm.
reducing inflammation is bad. It's the context in which these things are done, right? I think a lot of people walking around like the average person walks around with a ton of systemic inflammation, poor habits, poor sleep wake regulation, poor
Mhm.
diet. So maybe the ice bath makes them feel good. But the thing is, like, when you are there's a reason it makes you feel good, by the way. A very, very a clear neurological reason it makes you feel good. When you hop into an ice bath, your sympathetic nervous system goes into overdrive.
Mhm.
It is a noxious stimulus that your body is fighting against. So what it
Mhm.
does is it increases things like adrenaline, noradrenaline, and dopamine, all these adrenaline, sympathetic nervous system hormones to help facilitate blood flow and keep you warm, prevent you from dying of hypothermia.
Mhm.
So your brain also floods with dopamine, which is why you feel good. But it's
Mhm.
essentially the same dopaminergic response as having a stimulant, right? Which is why people feel good. But, alternatively, if you're just doing it for the energy benefits, you could just have a cup of coffee,
Mhm.
alternatively, right? Like, yeah, you could probably speak to, the idea of doing something hard, but it's like, okay, are you training your brain to do the thing that you want it to do, or are you just training your brain to do something hard that thinks you think is going to help you with something else?
Mhm.
Because yeah, you can do something hard, right? Like there's a ton of fitness people that do hard shit in the gym, but when it comes to say like running their own business, why aren't they are as successful? You would assume that they are,
Mhm.
right? Let's say you built a body that looks really great. It's like you
Mhm.
would then assume that your business is also great because you've taught yourself to do something hard in terms of
Mhm.
your body, in terms of
Mhm.
your physique. It's not a one-to-one translation to other areas of your life, right? Like if you want to say like build your own business or build a podcast, for example, and like, of renown, then the thing that's probably going to get you there is doing that thing,
Mhm.
right? Like podcasting more or, marketing more, those things, right? So I think people build a lot of this weird cult around biohacking to make themselves, again, it's like taking a supplement to make themselves feel healthy while not actually being healthy, because it's like what is the outcome you're hoping for?
Yeah.
What is the actual outcome that you are trying to get out of doing this thing,
Mhm.
right? Because, a morning routine is great if it sets you up to do the shit that actually needs to get
Yeah.
done, right? It's another kind of like a placebo thing. Um, Not to say that ice baths can't be useful. Like we talked about, like inflammation. Like, yeah, it can be good in certain contexts. Like, say post game, like let's say you play like a rugby or soccer game, and
Mhm.
you got another week of training up ahead, and you don't want to feel sore because you still need to perform. It's like, okay,
Mhm.
well, we're going to have that trade off of like, okay, realistically, like, yeah, we're not gonna, we might inhibit recovery slightly,
Mhm.
but we're also not feeling like garbage, so we can still move the next day and actually,
Mhm.
feel somewhat okay, right?
Mhm.
So then it becomes like a mental thing, because living in pain also sucks, right? Because it's going to, if you've ever, like, especially a university athlete or a college athlete, it's going to prevent you from, you wake up sore the next morning. It's like, do I want to go to class? Like, I'm just feeling wrecked, right? So in those sort of contexts, then yeah, it's like if an ice bath makes you feel good, then do it,
Mhm.
right? But it's not something you need to do all the time. It's not something that's going to have some long-lasting benefit.
Mhm.
Now there might be some other benefits there to, going out in the cold and, with like thermal regulation. Like if
Mhm.
you live in a colder climate, then yeah, maybe it helps you adapt to that climate better,
Mhm.
right? Look at Russian and Nordic countries.
Yeah, leaving the babies out in the strollers. Is that what you're gonna say? Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
crazy. I mean, I get it,
And
but it's just to me that's like, I
yeah. Well, and like sleep, it can also help you sleep better, right? The cold.
yeah.
So yeah, it's the context that matters, right? And I think that's what people take one thing and they're like, oh, I have to sauna every day, or I have to
Mm.
do this every day because I heard it's good for you. Oftentimes it can be a distraction from the things that you actually need to do to,
So, yeah, kinda going along those lines, you're talking about, like, sleep helping it's the cold helping with the sleep and all that stuff. That was one of the things I learned as well. They say the cold, dark room thing, sleep like a bear in a cold, dark room and it helps. One of the things that I heard when I was a teenager was that Michael Jordan, would sleep in a room when it's super hot after the flu game because he thought that would, like, keep all the sickness away. So it'd maybe be, like, 75, 80 degrees when he slept at night. And so I
oh
actually
wow.
tried to sleep hot, and I was so weird. Up until, like, college, I slept and I was almost like in a sweat every single night when I was sleeping, and I just got used
Yeah.
to that. My sleep was terrible. And now I start to have like the whole cold dark room thing, but part of that is just because my wife is a furnace and she's next to me. And I want to sleep better when I'm cold, so everything's got to be super super cool. But it's also interesting too that you mentioned you're talking about ice baths aren't bad in all situations, and we talked about placebo effect. The times where I found the most value is if we had like a double header. We had a game on a Saturday and then a Sunday. I would do it after that game on a Saturday so that I could survive the game on a Sunday. And then I was also like religious about foam rolling. There was a point in time where people said that foam rolling is like the greatest thing you could possibly do. If you don't do it, you're a dumb coach. It breaks up knots and adhesions and this, that, and the other. It doesn't. When I tell clients about it, I just say, like, "Listen, you can do it because it feels nice. If that's enough for you, go ahead and do it, but it's just a poor man's massage. It's not actually gonna make, like, a structural adaptation. It's not gonna change the way your muscles are. It's no different than, Theragun or using your own muscles, like your own thumb on your tissue or something like that, but, when I was in college and all that stuff, I would just feel so beat up from all the training I told you I was doing, and if I couldn't do, like, 10 minutes of foam rolling before getting down to the session, having, like, a gradual warm up, I felt like I couldn't survive a session because
Yeah.
I was so beat up. But then again, placebo, yeah, that helped, but what could have been more helpful is actually having an appropriate amount of training volume throughout the week, appropriate
Yeah.
sleep, and appropriate nutrition. So that's where, again, it was almost like you're doing this because you think it's going to make a difference, but you're kind of like majoring in the minors. When
Yeah.
if you just walked in on the 80%, 90% that matters most, you don't even worry about that 10% until you have that first 90% locked in. Like that's what's going to make the most impact.
Yeah. Well, I think the foam roller thing's another interesting thing, like I like ice baths, right? Because I was that in that camp of like I would, when I was in college, I would foam roll for like 20 minutes, half an hour
Yeah.
before I'd go lift. And it was almost like a mental thing of like, I got to get this done, otherwise my lift is gonna suck. And it made me feel good because then I would
Mhm.
feel super loose afterwards. And I was like, and there is evidence that it shows that it can help with temporary increases in
Yeah.
ranges of motion.
Yeah.
So, but the other thing that it could potentially help with is because I don't want to, like, everyone, this pendulum has gone from one way of like foam rolling is the greatest thing to ever exist, and now it's kind of swung the other way, where it's like foam rolling is completely useless. I was like, well, the truth is probably somewhere, yeah, maybe closer to this side, but I think there's still some utility
Sure.
of it. Like, I don't really foam roll anymore, but there is like, and the aspect of massage or like soft tissue manipulation is that it can help relax your nervous system. So it might still have an indirect effect on recovery by down regulating your nervous system. So like let's say you foam roll before bed and then your sleep quality improves because it helps activate your parasympathetic nervous system. So okay, now our sleep's improved, and because our sleep was better, our recovery was better and our energy is better the next day.
Mm.
So is it something that, like, compared to, paying to go get a massage or whatever, I mean, it's a more cost effective solution, but in instances where we've overreached with our training and we're feeling especially sore, it can be a useful tool,
Mm.
right? So I think again, like, we just have to be more strategic about the tools that we're using and when we're using them,
Mm.
and not kind of, because I think everyone, our brains are very, like, even though we've humans have created all this technology and the internet and, the ability to talk to you over, thousands of kilometers away,
Mhm.
it's our brains are still primal in many aspects.
Uh-huh.
We like to create camps or a black and white opinion to create binaries out of different things, right?
Uh-huh.
So and it's just a way for our brain to process information and make sense of things. And also social media kind of it favors the controversial opinions. So people will
Sure.
intentionally put like foam rolling is useless or ice baths are useless or you have to ice bath every day or things like that, right? Because it creates engagement, but
Mhm.
that's also what speaks to our primal brains that, gives that engagement. So I think what more people need to be willing to do is experiment with themselves, right? Is try doing something for an X period of time and see how effective it is for you. Like I've tried I tried a ketogenic diet for 6 months straight. I
Mhm.
wanted to see what it would be like for myself, right? It sucked for my performance. At first it was like, okay, like I lost a ton of weight. I looked really good. And then all of a sudden, like my sprint sessions started sucking and my
Mhm.
lifts started sucking and like I felt lethargic all the time. So I think with all these modalities, I think there's a time and a place for them. Like for years I couldn't turn my neck to the right
Uh-huh.
after a rugby injury. I got knocked out and my neck was messed up for years.
Yes.
And I remember looking at different things like um cupping and traditional Chinese medicine.
Mhm.
And there's a practitioner who's a good buddy of mine now, um, who does that sort of thing, like the suction cupping and the like active release therapy techniques and stuff like that. So I was like, you know what? He actually worked on how I found out about him is that he worked on Chris Bumstead, the Olympia bodybuilder, when he was up here in Vancouver. And so I went to go see this guy and I felt incredible. For the first time ever, I could actually turn my neck and like do all those things. And I had been to massage therapy and all these things, right? So I think that there's a time and a place for modalities. And I
Uh-huh.
think the way you find out is try it at least a couple times, see if it's effective, see what effect it has on you. Because I think another problem with exercise science or research in general is we often looked at a direct cause and effect relationship. Well, the cause and effect might be an indirect effect, right? It might be what we call a second order effect.
Mhm.
So it might be a cascade of things, like how I described with foam rolling. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, there might be there might not be a direct cause to recovery, right? Your muscle tissue might not recover faster, but if it helps improve your sleep, it will help you improve your muscle
Sure.
recovery, right? So it's a second order effect in that case, right?
Mhm.
Same thing with, some supplements potentially as well, right? Melatonin might not be that effective of a supplement
Mhm.
for if the outcome we're looking at is recovery or like, muscle or strength output, for example. But if it improves our sleep, which then improves our recovery, well, then our muscle output the following day might be close to baseline again. So it
Mhm.
might, and you're looking at a second order effect.
Mhm.
So when you start to look at those things in a broader lens like that, like second and third order effects, is this actually helping?
Mhm.
And then also making that evaluation for yourself. Is it worth it for me to do
Uh-huh.
this? Right? Or would I rather do something else? Like you said, modulate your trading volume a little bit better. So,
So
because
it's
some
interesting.
people,
Yeah, right now we're in this like society that's obsessed with, well, kind of two different directions. One is what you're saying, where it's just those black and white statements: foam rolling good, foam rolling bad. Because it's a lot easier to just have one of those stances than it is to actually be like, well, when is foam rolling good or bad, or how effective is it? But then the other thing is this like obsession with optimal. This word drives me up a wall. It was functional before, but it's like, is functional just doing suitcase carries with no sort of correlation to what it's supposed to transfer to? Do you care what the actual goal is? And
yeah,
suitcase carries is the only core exercise you ever need to do. Is side bending bad because the function or whatever? But now it's optimal. People talk about if it's not number one, number two is not worth doing. And I had a coach on the podcast earlier. His name is Pat Damiano, and he's an unconventional strength coach. And he gets cooked by the conventional strength training community because they're like, this isn't optimal. You know, you want to get stronger, don't grab kettle sandbag or a mace or something like that. Grab
yeah,
machines, and all these different things. And he's like, all right, this might be 80% as good as what you're doing, but I enjoy doing it. I do it on a regular basis. Aggressive overload still exists. Your hands don't know what you're holding, which implement you're holding. And he's like, I'm strong, I'm jacked, I'm fit, I'm in great shape. I enjoy my training. I do it on a regular basis. He's like saying, there's nothing wrong with barbells. They probably are better for getting you stronger. Nothing wrong with machines. They probably are better for getting you bigger and all that stuff. But he's like, it's all context dependent. And not everybody needs the number one thing. And then also, like you're saying, that placebo effect is real. I don't want to sound like I'm trashing ice baths or foam rolling because like I still will do things that aren't optimal, but they make me feel good in certain contexts. You talked about your neck. I do jujitsu once a week, MMA once a week, and then try to hit the heavy bag like Muay Thai stuff once or twice a week. And when I'm done with MMA or jujitsu, my neck is not feeling the best.
Right.
And when someone's trying to rip your head off, of course. So sometimes I'll just get like one of those little neck massagers and I'll just like use it for 20 minutes or something like that. I'll take a hot bath or I'll put like icy hot on my neck, knowing that it's not like the most effective thing in the world, but if it just helps me feel relaxed and get a better night's sleep, then what you're talking about is like the second order thing. It's like maybe my neck feels better in the morning because I got a good night's sleep and I got a good night's sleep because I was
Yeah.
able to relax it just enough to go to bed and
Yeah.
not being crazy pain. So I really appreciate all the kind of nuance you're applying because it would be a lot easier for you to say supplements good, foam rolling bad, and all that stuff, but that's not
Totally.
actually service to anybody listening to this podcast.
Yeah, I think that's what I encourage people who are listening to this is just to be curious about the
Mhm.
information you hear. Because we take things at face value when you see them on social media, and then elicits an emotional response. You're like, screw this guy and his
Yeah.
opinion. It's like, okay, well, try and entertain that opinion. Where is he getting the information from? What's his source of information? Look for it for yourself. Evaluate it for yourself. It's an exercise in critical thinking that I think
Mhm.
again, because we tend to be, mentally lazy with a lot of things. But one thing that when I was working in the research lab, every week we'd have this thing called journal club, and we'd have to find an article in kind of the area of research that we were doing, right? And present it to the rest of the lab group. And here's me, like I'm an undergrad research associate. Everyone else is like, there's a couple other undergrads in our lab, but everyone else is like a PhD student. So I'm like
Yeah.
the dumbest person in the room, and I'm like presenting this piece of research, and I evaluated it. I'm like, yeah, they're looking at this construct, they're looking at this variable. Then I get, for the next 15 minutes just get dumped on. I was like, ah, man. But it forced me to think a little, to ask questions of myself a little bit and ask questions of what I was reading a lot better. It's like, okay, like these people, these researchers are looking at this outcome. Is the research question they're asking actually assessing the construct they're looking at?
Mhm.
Right? Because if like let's use recovery as an example, right?
Mhm.
What is recovery? Like what actually is recovery?
Sure.
Is it just eliminating soreness, or is it something else beyond that? Is it the return of our muscle tissue being able to produce that same amount of force, if not greater?
Mhm.
Right? Like what is actually recovery? Because when we say the statement recovery, it's a bit of it's a vague statement,
Yeah.
right? We haven't operationally defined it. So like that's the same thing is like ice baths improve recovery or sauna improves recovery. It's like, okay, like what does it actually improve?
Mhm.
Right? What are
Yeah,
we looking at?
to test exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have to know exactly what we're looking at from a more granular perspective rather than using some of these broad statements, because the broad statements are easy to like kind of be like, oh yeah, it improves strength. Okay, what when you say strength, does it improve maximal strength like 1 RM? Does it improve repeat power? Because you'd be able to produce strength, multiple times over a given time frame. What are we looking at, right? So it's important, like, and I'm sure you use it with your clients that maybe from a sport perspective, when they're looking at conditioning, it's like, I want to improve my conditioning. It's like,
Yeah. What kind?
what kind? What kind of athlete are you? You know, right? When I look at a rugby player, it's like, I want to improve my strength. I was like, do you need to improve your 1 rep squat? Or do
Mhm.
you just actually need to improve your aerobic base because you gas out after 15
Mm.
minutes?
All right, this
Right?
gives me a little rabbit hole that I want to go down. First of all, that I discovered you was Tyler Peretz and Ben Racky. They met you at the Coach 'em Up
Yeah.
and all that stuff, and they said really great things about you. So that's why I reached out to you. They've been on my podcast, I think, twice each, and all that stuff. We have this little group
Yeah.
chat on Instagram. We call it Run Club, kind of jokingly. I actually enjoy running, but within context, I find that I'd rather run faster than longer because I just think it's too much wear and tear for all the other things I'm trying to do. So I might
Right.
cap it at 5K, once a month, and then maybe run a mile, once a week or something like that. And I'd
Yeah.
rather just get a faster time than try to do 10K, half marathon training and all that stuff. It's just too much to also try to train for strength, also try to train for,
Martial
sports
arts.
and martial arts and all that stuff. And then also, the time constraint, I have a kid and all that stuff. I can't be, out on the road running all day and all that stuff. And so we call it Run Club because there's this debate with one of the coaches in the group with another coach that's not in the group. I'm not going to name names specifically, but somebody was saying that everybody should run, every single person should run. And then the other one was like, well, maybe not, I wouldn't take the contestants on The Biggest Loser, they had them doing, burpees and box jumps and running and all that stuff. And these people, it's just way too much wear and tear on their joints. So he's like, there could have been a safer modality for that person to do at that point in time. It could be a treadmill, it could be a bike, it could be just getting in a pool and moving around where it actually unloads the joints a little bit. So there's that debate, and we called it Run Club to kind of make fun of that argument. But I had another guest on the podcast, Caleb Handley Performance. He's a boxing coach and
Okay.
boxing strength coach. And he has this almost like a crusade against running being a necessity in the context of boxing. He says people will do 10Ks several times a week, 5Ks every day in boxing, and then be too gassed to have good skill work. And then you don't even realize that, like, yes, you have an incredible aerobic base, but then boxing isn't inherently purely aerobic. It's one of the weirdest sports in the terms that, like, you think that anaerobic, you have like 10 seconds of max effort, but then it feels like you're doing max effort for 3-minute rounds, 12 rounds, and all that stuff. It's one of the most gassy things ever. And you're conditioning just from practicing the sport on its own, whether it's shadow boxing, heavy bag, or sparring rounds, or hitting the mitts or something like that, is phenomenal. So running isn't necessary. So it's just interesting having this whole, again, it kind of gets into the contextual, when is it appropriate? You're talking about what are we measuring? Someone says they want to improve their conditioning. They run 2 miles. There, my conditioning's better. And it's like, okay, well, Caleb Handley will say if you do 10-second bike sprints, 50 seconds rest, you do 5 to 10 of them, that'll help your boxing performance better than running. And so it's just interesting that, yeah, it gets into optimal. And that's why I know I said I just shat on optimal 10 seconds ago. Optimal matters if you're pursuing, and same with specialization, because then GPP is a big thing today too. Specialization matters too. If you're really trying to get that last 1%, it's the same thing as supplements, the same thing as all these things. If you're trying to reach an elite level of something, then yeah, you should care about all those extra details because it might be the difference between you and your competitors, or making it to the next level or not. But if you're just training to train, if you're not sleeping or you're not eating right and all that stuff, then going for a run or doing a fan bike, it doesn't really matter that much if your conditioning is absolutely nothing. But if you are trying to achieve success in a high realm, you should get specific about your goals. You should have a high understanding. You should attack them more directly. So I know it kind of went off in a
Absolutely.
bunch of different directions, but
No, it's good. It's because like me personally, like I used to run 10-kilometer runs 2 or 3 times a week to train for
uh,
rugby, and I was like, why am I gassed out during rugby games? I'm like, right, like
it's not the same.
it's not the same thing. So we have to get specific about what outcome we're trying to achieve, and I think
Mhm.
I think what happens too in social media is you get into different areas of fitness where people use definitive statements in a specific context, but
Uh,
not communicating what that context is, right? So I think that's also where problematic with short form content,
sure.
right? I've heard people are trying to, and that's something that I've started my own YouTube channel now, where it's just right now it's just client testimonials, but my plan is to actually delve into the rabbit hole into deeper topics of like, okay, what is fitness? How do we define, or like, how do we define these how do we
Mhm,
define these broad terms, right? Like, what is recovery, and kind
mhm.
of get into the weeds and kind of in the research of it. And yeah, that's kind of like what I have going on eventually. It's outside of the
Awesome.
client.
Yeah, I saw you started posting clips on your Instagram of the whiteboard behind you and you explaining concepts and
Yeah.
more. I appreciate that because it is easy to just put up a 60-second clip and say, fan bike, no running, or running, no fan. Saying this about Caleb Handley. He's a brilliant coach, really nice guy. And he does have YouTube too, where he gets into long form kind of content, and all that. But I do find there may be even this, I see this shift where coaches are starting to do more and more long form stuff, but maybe there's even just a fatigue from people in general of consuming so much short form content and lacking nuance. And I hope that people become more curious and will listen to an audiobook or a podcast or watch a YouTube video where someone has a whiteboard and they're going to spell it out for you. So
Yeah.
I wanted to respect your time. Do you have more time? Because I wanted to
Yeah.
discuss one more
Yeah.
topic.
Absolutely.
And then, okay, cool. So I think you do a fantastic job helping your clients with body composition. I think in a sporting context, that obviously matters, especially for sports where you have to cut weight, where you have like weight classes in general, or for bodybuilding, for example. But then I find that when it comes to the average personal training client, it is much more likely that someone reaches out because they have to lose some weight than it is that they want to, put on some muscle or get stronger or whatever. It's usually that people are overweight and they want to lose fat. They say lose weight. I like body composition scales because if someone loses 5 pounds of fat and gains 5 pounds of muscle and they see the scale hasn't changed, they'll say, oh, nothing changed. Like, I don't know, your clothes fit differently. You're stronger, you're healthier, you feel better, like everything's better. But what is your kind of big rocks? If you're going to work with somebody who's never done anything training related or nutrition related, what are your big rocks for body composition and just making positive improvements in that realm?
I would say the biggest thing is actually tracking your nutrition, because it's like at the end of the day, the fat loss aspect is actually probably the easiest part of it. The
Uh-huh.
muscle gain is a little bit harder because muscle gain is highly reliant on stimulus, right? So then we come down to like exercise selection, exercise execution, technique, and stuff like
Mhm.
that when you're trying to speak in terms of hypertrophy. With a lot of athletes, they tend to be a bit more competent in that area, so it's easier to train them.
Uh-huh.
But when it comes to the fat loss aspect, that aspect is
Uh-huh.
really easy because it's like, okay, do you track your nutrition? And oftentimes it's like, yeah, like, people will come to me and be like, yeah, I kind of track. I was like, what does kind of track mean? Like, what does that look like? Right. And it's oftentimes they've never tracked macros. So in that aspect, it's like, okay, well, look, let's start tracking at least your calories and protein to start off with, right? Because that's the biggest lever for them to pull. It's like it actually turns out that I'm under eating during the day and then significantly overeating at night, right?
Mhm.
It's kind of like looking at
Your
your
finances.
finances when it
Yeah.
comes to dieting, right? Like, or when it comes down to fat loss, it's like
Oh.
you need to track your nutrition because
Uh-huh.
the analogy is like, okay, well, you need to understand where your money is coming and going.
Mhm.
Like if you're someone who's spending a lot of money on, I don't know, going to the movies
Nothing
or
or yeah.
going out to eat, you don't realize it until you start tracking it. It's like,
Uh-huh.
oh, okay, like I actually eat a lot out. Like I had a client recently that I use the app Chronometer, so I can
Mhm.
actually view my clients all their diet their food through the app and be
Uh-huh.
like, okay, like I can see exactly where the deficiencies are, where their problems are. And I saw that he was eating a ton of fat. And
Uh-huh.
two clients in the last like week said it. So like, yeah, it turns out I'm eating like double the fat that I need to be consuming for the
Yeah.
for the day. It's like, oh, okay, like that's an easy swap. Let's use leaner sources of protein,
Mhm.
right? And that tends to be, one of the big things is like the big rock, if you're coming to work with me, is just track your nutrition.
Mhm.
Because then it's easy. If you don't track your data, you don't know what to change. It's
Uh-huh.
like logging any metric when it comes to your training. You're logging your weights, your reps, your sets.
Mhm.
Like, are we getting stronger or not? Right? Like it becomes pretty evident then. And people view tracking. There's two camps. It's like, okay, you have to track or you don't have to track. Well, if you can control your weight and your body composition without tracking,
Mhm.
great. But you're not, which is why you came to me to help you
Right.
with it, right? So we have to make a change somewhere. So that's the big one. And then just I also do an intake of like of their stress response. So I look
Mhm.
at their psychology in terms of, okay, are you someone who gets irritable really easily? What is your sleep like? What is your mood like
Uh-huh.
from day to day? And the reason why I do that is it can also be a sign that they are someone that could be under eating at
Uh-huh.
certain points and then overeating in other points, or
Interesting.
their diet is just not consistent with their caloric intake.
Mhm.
And that's actually what I found too. Someone who has a day-to-day fluctuation in their calorie intake, their overall energy intake, tends to be someone who has poor mood regulation. They aren't able to, and when your mood fluctuates like that, when you are easy to irritate or you're, easily bothered by certain things, then it's harder to instill habits in that person that
Mhm.
give them progress. So that's another point is like, okay, like you're under eating some days in your caloric intake and then you're overeating other days. So what we need to do is try and balance that out in order to regulate your mood,
Mhm.
right? And then, basically trying to instill habits that will give them the best ROI rather than making them do a ton of things. Okay, like let's meal prep some things that you don't really have to cook. Let's say
Uh-huh.
you're busy, right? Like I'm working with a firefighter right now. He's got 3 kids and a wife who also works shift work. So
Uh-huh.
it's like, okay, what are the days you actually have off? What are the days, when on those days, that's where you're going to actually have to set aside an hour or two to meal prep, at least for yourself, those
Uh-huh.
meals that you're going to need for the work week, right? So we can help regulate your mood, at
Mhm.
least like help you just get sufficient energy so you're not prone to then overeating at McDonald's
Mhm.
when you're coming off a shift or something like that.
Mhm.
So it's with most people, I think it's just let's start tracking your nutrition, right? And then see where you're at mentally is like variability wise is like, okay, like are you someone, looking at those metrics like, okay, like your mood sucks day to day, your sleep is probably garbage too, if
Uh-huh.
that's the case. So it's like food and sleep are probably going to be the two biggest, the tracking, sorry, and
Mhm.
tracking food and sleep are probably going to be biggest things.
Mhm,
Like I tend to get people if someone does have poor sleep,
mhm,
it's something I'll be like, okay, let's for now, let's just take a sleep supplement.
okay,
Especially if you're on shift work, it's
mhm,
going to be almost impossible for you to have a regular circadian rhythm.
sure.
But if you don't have shift work, then it's a bit easier. But I almost try and recommend a sleep supplement for everyone just to help them getting in the habit of trying to get to bed at a more regular interval.
I like how you, people like to throw around, like, holistic wellness and all that stuff, and it kinda gets a little hippy-dippy sometimes, but, like, they are all linked, you know, you can't separate one thing over the other. I actually had this, discussion with Ben and Tyler in our group the other day where, I've seen a lot of coaches now selling, like, neurological training, and I don't
Okay.
like the idea of neurological training on its own because how can you isolate a neurological stimulus from a physiological, stimulus or adaptation in the context of, like, sprinting is incredibly taxing neurologically, but also you're gonna have a physiological adaptation to sprinting, or if you 1 RM, your deadlift or something like that, the same thing. You're gonna be it's not the same physiological adaptation as doing, 5 sets of 10 of whatever sort of a hinge variation, RDLs, but it's not like there's nothing there, and so they'll sell like, these really rapid sort of, like, fast footwork sort of movements, and then they'll just do, like, plyos and
Mm.
everything's gonna be speed variation. They'll do throws and sprints and jumps and all the fast sort of stuff, or they'll do, like, a lot of isometrics, whether it's overcoming or yielding isometrics, and they say, "This will make you, a better athlete," and those things are all actually good in context. I just don't like the idea of it's purely neurological and not physiological, or that and for anybody listening, neurological software and physiological is hardware. That's kind of the easiest way for me to explain that to people. It's not like you're actually a computer and you can take a chip out and replace it with a better chip, or you can actually just download a better software or something like that. They work together. The body is connected. I just don't like that idea of sales. There's a trainer for BJ Penn back in his heyday, and BJ Penn said, "I'm on board with this train." He's completely bought in because he says, "We're not improving the engine of the car. We're just giving it a better driver." And I just thought, wouldn't you want a better car and a better driver? And you also
Yeah, I
can't
was gonna
isolate them.
say.
I just like I just so that was, they are connected, and when people try to separate it in that instance, or now you have people selling fascial training or lymphatic training, do these little wiggles, and then your lymphatic system will flush this and that, and it's a secret Chinese technique that's 10,000 years old. I'm like, it's just
I know exactly. So if you said that a week ago, I wouldn't have no idea what you're talking about,
okay.
lymphatic training. But the reason I'm assuming this stems from Huberman as well, because he
Mm,
apparently, I don't know if he's affiliated with this. You can buy these at home like indoor trampolines with the handlebars, and you
okay,
jump on them, and
okay.
apparently they help drain your lymphatic system. And I'm like, oh, so like exercise.
Yeah,
Like I get what you're saying is like, okay, like you if you want to jump on on a trampoline because it's fun for you, go ahead, but there's no like if you exercise, your lymphatic system is getting drained. Do you think your cardiovascular system and your where do you think your cardiovascular drains into? So if
mhm,
it's draining into that, then it's going to drain it normally without you having to do a specialized type of training, right? It's but when you say neurological training, is that like that Marv Marinovich
never
style
know that.
training that Troy
Absolutely, that's
Yeah,
true.
yeah.
Yep.
I remember seeing that like 15 years ago, Troy Polamalu, because Troy Polamalu is
Yeah,
probably my favorite football
I love
player of all
them. Yeah,
time.
yeah.
And I remember watching this video of him because that was like around the time when I was in university for rugby, and I was like
Mhm,
watching this style of training, and he's completely neurological. And like he was an explosive athlete, don't get me
mhm,
wrong, but he's an explosive athlete who was already like 210 pounds. He already
mhm.
built he probably didn't need to gain any more mass. So I can see in
Yes.
the context of him,
Yeah.
he's already jacked and like, has all the mass he needs. So like, he probably doesn't need to do any sort of like hypertrophy or pure
Yeah,
strength work,
absolutely, and that's the thing, though, is you're gonna see
right?
some 13-year-old kid who sees that clip and thinks, "I just gotta do this fast footwork thing. I don't have to touch a barbell ever." And then he's gonna get
Yeah.
folded by the guy that's, back squatting 405 or something like that. So it's like there is a time and a place. If your hardware is shit, improve your hardware. If your software is shit, improve your software. You can't really isolate them when you're only working on one or the other. You can bias it, sure,
Yep.
but it doesn't mean that one is purely this or purely that because they still are connected, and I just thought it was kind of
Uh,
silly to sell it that way.
to draw another example, when I was like getting jacked in rugby because I was training like a bodybuilder. Like when I was
Mhm,
playing, I was about 200, 220, 230. And I remember like I was fast too. Like I ran track in high school
mhm,
as well. So and I remember I was playing on the wing for this one game, and this guy was coming across, and I probably outweighed him by about like 30 pounds. And I was like, man, I'm gonna knock this guy on his ass. This is funny because I
yeah,
was carrying the ball, and he bowled me over. And I was like, I remember getting up and I was like, wow, what the heck? What happened? And like, I just was at the time, like, I was big and fast, but I wasn't explosive. Like,
Uh-huh.
I had good top speed, but I didn't have the acceleration. Right. So in my case, it's like, okay, like I have a good amount of mass and a good level of base strength, but I probably could have benefited from more of that, what you describe as neurological training, right?
Mhm.
Like that explosive style training. Cause like, good base strength and good speed, but not actually explosive. Right. So I think that that context matters, but like it's kind of interesting how people have kind of attached terms to these different
Sure,
training modalities,
sure.
right?
So kind of along those lines, because you had your rugby story, I had a, teammate in college who was, originally a football player and he did bodybuilding, and he also did track. Really fast, really strong. The dude looked amazing and all that stuff, but then when it came to actually touching the ball, every time he kicked as hard as he could. He'd go 50 yards over the bar. Every time he sprinted, he'd do well if he could sprint in a straight line. If he had to if he had to do anything other than his perfect track technique, like, it didn't work and all that stuff, and I'd see him get, like, knocked over and all that, and by people much smaller or, like, weaker and all that stuff. And all that came down to was it very much was a skill issue that, that he didn't have precision, he didn't have time, he didn't have coordination, he didn't have balance that he needed to actually apply the force at the right angle, at the right time, and all these different things. So he just like overdo absolutely everything. You tense up, you don't play as fluid as you need to. But then I had another teammate who, he looked like a wet noodle, and I could never get the ball off him because when you push is like this like Zen sort of monk thing where like if you push, normally the thing that they teach you, at least in like Western society, or at least I'll say it differently in North America and in like England, they teach you, shoulder shoulder challenge as hard as you can. But maybe in South America, they teach being a little bit more slippery. And so he was Colombian, and what he'd do is he would actually bait you into a shoulder challenge and then pull the shoulder away, and you just fall on the ground and he never make contact with you. And it's just like such a clever thing. And it's like it's cool to see that there are different ways to do something that someone that's half the athlete that somebody else is in terms of hardware just has so much better skill and game understanding that he's going to perform better in terms of getting to
Yeah.
the ball first or winning this challenge just because of the timing. So I think that was a really cool thing about it too. I wanted to respect your time and just ask you some rapid fire questions if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, is there anything that you've changed your mind on recently or during your career that you feel is important to share?
That's a yeah, that's a good question. I used to think that that carbs during training were useless.
Okay.
I was very much in that camp. And actually, it was funny because I saw a piece of research that disagreeing with what I'm about to say right now. Another big like science-based influencer, he posted research saying that muscle glycogen doesn't get depleted during training, so it's point the like intra-workout are useless basically.
Mhm.
And I was like, that's not true. Like I used to think that too. Like I just think, oh, like I don't need to like drink, during a training session. I don't
Mhm.
need to, consume carbohydrates or any sort of nutrition. It's pointless. And I was like, wait, like I started thinking about it in the last like year. Like, well, your blood volume is the amount of blood volume your body pumping through any given muscle at any time is significantly amplified while you're training, right?
Mhm.
Your body is in its most, insulin sensitive state
Mhm.
because, that's what training does. So it's like, okay, if I included carbs in my training, like would my performance improve? It was more just an experiment to see, okay, like I'll try this. I've seen other people do it. And yeah, it was a night and day difference. My performance was like markedly improved. My
Mhm.
training sessions, even just weight training sessions,
Mhm.
right? Where you think, okay, like this isn't highly um highly glycogen depleting, like it can't make that much of a difference. I was like, no, I was mistaken. I was wrong. It definitely does.
What would you
And
take? Because, like, during halftime of our games, they gave us, like, little gels or they'd give us, like, gummy bears or something like that. What would you take during your sessions?
I just use dextrose right
Okay.
now. I think maybe something a little easier on your stomach,
Mhm.
like carboline, like any sort of like high molecular weight
Mhm.
carbohydrate, like some kind of like yeah, starch-based carbohydrate powder would be good too.
Mhm.
So things like Carbolin or Vitargo are some of those examples. But yeah, right now I use dextrose. It doesn't seem to upset my stomach at all.
Mhm.
Some people might be different. Like people use maltodextrin, which can definitely not be great. But yeah, that's what I use. Dextrose is pretty cheap, which
Mhm.
is basically why I use it. But yeah, I'm sure gummy worms would be fine or something like
Yeah.
that. But dextrose and honey. I also mix creatine in my
Yeah.
shake, sorry. But I think for athletes especially too, any sort of like athlete like soccer, rugby, football, they would also benefit greatly from something like that
Well, you see,
instead of just one.
yeah, you see, like, ultra endurance athletes where carbs are, like, the thing they live and die by during the so if it works in that context, why would it not work in during a 90-minute soccer game or something like that? But it works for somebody if they're gonna try to run a 2-hour marathon. It's only 30 minutes longer. I know it's not the same exact physiological demand and all that stuff. And first of all, there's very few
Yeah.
people that can run close to 2 hours for a marathon. But why is it that in the endurance space, people value carbs properly, but then in other sports, they're like, nah, it's bad. It's going to make me fat or it's whatever, even though it's a
Right.
very important energy source. So I do find that's an interesting thing that you're mentioning.
Yeah, because like when it like those explosive sports like
Uh,
rugby, football, but even soccer too, it's also explosive, right? Like
mhm,
you're sprinting, you're kicking, using the phosphogenic energy system. But once that's depleted, it goes glycolytic, right? You'll
uh-huh,
start to rely on carbohydrates. Well, in that context, carbs with creatine in your
mhm,
shake
uh-huh.
will provide substrates for both energy systems, so it can't be a detriment theoretically.
Another question I was going to ask you is, what is a major misconception in the training or just health and nutrition space that you want to dispel? If you could just pick one thing that kind of grinds your gears.
Oh, wow. Um, right now, I kind of have like a personal, I don't say personal crusade. I think that's a mistaken statement. I have a bone to pick with people that are just this whole peptide craze.
Mhm,
Um, and the idea of TRT
mhm,
is, I don't think most people who are saying they're on TRT are doing TRT. I think that is a outright. I don't think they're lying intentionally, but they're definitely not correct in their statement because TRT is based on the assumption that you're replacing something
mhm,
that was there. You taking, you know, X amount of milligrams of testosterone, that's at that point you're just taking a cycle.
mhm,
You're not replacing anything. You're right. Like you're at that point you're just taking a performance enhancing drug. I
uh-huh,
mean, call it what it is. Like
uh-huh,
that's fine. There's no shade from me. Like
uh-huh,
I'm definitely considering it at some point in my body because I'm competing in bodybuilding this year. Like I'm
mhm,
definitely going to consider it. Now that, like, we have a kid on the way. Um, yeah, I would love to, but like it creates this false perception of health of like, oh, well, I'm healthier because I'm on TRT. I was like, well, no, there's some pretty negative side effects to
mhm,
topping on TRT. It's not healthier for you to do that. It's healthier if you actually have a clinical requirement to be on it, which majority of people that are taking TRT, they're not.
uh-huh.
They don't have a clinical requirement. They're just taking drugs.
I like how you presented that. There's no beating around the bush there. On the flip side, what is a positive change you're noticing in the health and fitness space?
Oh, um, I think more people in general are getting into fitness. I don't know if more people in general are getting healthier as a whole, but I think more people are, fitness is becoming more accessible with things like, I know people in the S&C world like to take a big fat dump on high rocks, but
Oh, yeah.
um, I've
It's done a lot of
I've
good.
made
It
fun of
can't all be bad,
it
right?
is, yeah. I mean, same thing. Like it's kind of the way CrossFit did years ago as well.
Uh-huh,
Like it made fitness a little bit more accessible. I think High
mhm,
Rocks is just a more accessible version of CrossFit. Just
uh-huh.
okay, we just took out all the like technically demanding lifts, and now you
Yeah.
just run and pull a sled. And I actually don't know. I actually don't know
All
what
the
you do at
events.
High Rocks.
Yeah, there's like the
Yeah.
wall ball, I think it's a skeet, or I think it's a sled, burpee broad jumps,
Okay.
I think those are all the but it's basically just it's just if CrossFit was gymnastics and Olympic weightlifting and there's strength and then endurance, it's like they basically prioritize endurance and have a little mixture of strength in there, but they take out the
Yeah.
hardest things, which is Olympic lifting and gymnastics movements, which is their own sports, very technically demanding.
Yeah. And I think that's great because like A, it's doing what we want fitness to do is get more
Mhm,
people involved in getting
uh-huh,
healthier, right? Like we just had our event here in Vancouver, High Rocks Vancouver. I think it was the first one, and there was a ton of people that
mhm,
went to it.
uh,
One of my best friends, he was a photographer for for an influencer that was there, and he's like,
okay,
dude, it was massive. This
yeah,
event was probably one of the largest events, like fitness events ever held in
mhm,
Vancouver, and I was
mhm,
like, outside of like marathon or
yeah.
the sun run or whatever we have up here. But yeah, I was like, that's great. I think that's having fitness more accessible is always going to be a good thing. And I know like, some purists like to make fun of it, but
It's not all bad.
it's
Same with CrossFit. You see
not all,
some, like, negligent CrossFit training, but if it gets people to train hard, I think that's a pretty cool thing, and if
yeah,
you can do CrossFit and not get injured, you're probably a freak, because you can do some pretty cool stuff.
yeah,
Yeah, for me, one of the things that may be kind of like a controversial hot take is I started my business during COVID because I didn't have the choice to go to a gym and be hired by somebody when they were all shut down. So I
yeah,
just had some power blocks and I put them in my trunk and I drive to people's homes and I give them sessions out of their own homes.
nice.
But now I mostly do mobile personal training. I do some sessions out of my garage gym, but COVID, I think, was a good thing for people to get into fitness too, in the sense that the home gym market exploded with innovation. Everybody has like
Yes.
they have Tonal, they have Peloton, they have all these different things. They have Fight Camp, which is like the Peloton of boxing. They have all these different things, but people are at least like doing group fitness classes at the house, and it's at least a step into fitness. And like when I first got into personal training, it was kind of stupid of me, but I was like, group fitness is shit. You know, you don't have the best progressive overload, you don't have the best supervision, this, that, the other. And I'm like changing my mind on a lot of things personally. It's like if it's affordable or there's a community aspect or get someone training harder than not train at all and they can do it safely, then it's a really nice thing. Again, that's like it doesn't have to be optimal. Something's better than nothing in that context. So that's definitely one of the things I changed my mind on. But COVID is like for me as a hot take, that was good for business. And I also think that also made it more accessible for people too.
I think people in general like start to like wake up to being a little bit more healthy after COVID because it was
Yeah.
like everyone's sick. It's like, oh, how do we get healthier?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I have 2 more questions. One is what feels like a touchdown in your job or like a home run? What is like feels like a huge win in your job?
For me, when a client starts giving me positive outcomes that aren't related to just their aesthetics,
Okay,
like if
cool.
so, like yeah, like I feel like I have energy all throughout the day. Like I feel like I'm in a good mood all the time. I feel one of the biggest ones for me was a client that I have that he came to me on PEDs. We removed a bunch of compounds that he was taking because like we had him do blood work and everything. And he's like he has a young son. He's like, I thought I had my low back pain, my chronic pain, and my joints is all gone. And he's like, I like see he posts clips of him playing with his son all the time now, and I'm like, that's a huge win. That to
Mhm.
me is like, okay, great. Like you look leaner, you lost 20 pounds of body fat, like, but now like you feel happier, you're moving better, and he's like, yeah, I thought I was like resigned to walk up the stairs like an old man. I was like,
Mhm.
that to me is like a huge touchdown.
Yeah, I have like a similar thing where I'd say that usually client's first goal is my second goal because my first goal for them is like what you're talking about is just having an improved life, you know, being healthier and feeling better and all that. And so if like your goal is purely aesthetic or, you know, squat 500 pounds or something like that, but you're destroying your body in the process to do it, it's like I want you to hit those goals, but I'm not going to be the person to put you in a bad situation. That's just not something I agree with. I'll talk to people if they want to do something like maybe this isn't the best way to go about it, whatever. But there's a client, he lost, 80 pounds in about a year and then got a six-pack, and, like, you might think, "Pounds, that's awesome. A six-pack, that's awesome." The thing that he said, which was so small and so stupid that just made me, really proud in that moment, was he said he was playing pickleball, and a shot that he thought he could never reach when he had more weight on his body, he overran to get to the shot or something like that. I'm like, "That's awesome." Like, your body can now do things that you couldn't do before, and it's just he's playing with his kids more, all these different things. His kids are playing, rugby themselves actually now, so he goes to the track
Nice.
with them and puts a band around their waist and helps them do, like, sprints, and he's able to do that. I'm like, "That's awesome." That's for me the number one thing with the client. Um, you getting a six-pack is awesome too, but that's, like, a secondary thing for me. It might be huge for you,
Yeah.
but for me, it's, like, cool, but playing with the kids is, cooler. The final question is, if you could have one piece of advice, doesn't have to be about fitness, it could be about absolutely anything towards absolutely anybody, what would that piece of advice be?
Piece of advice. Don't be afraid to experiment on yourself.
Mhm,
Like, if you want to try a different training style, try it and at least try it for, give it an actual solid effort for at
mhm,
least 3 or 4 months and just experience it, just to have the experience of like, oh,
mhm,
okay, did that work for me? Because I think that's the problem is like social media has created this like call out culture of like,
mhm,
this is stupid. Why are you doing this? And like, maybe you or I have like kind of like, I know I have looked at something. I was like, that's stupid. Why would you do that? Like, look at things like I know like it's popular for a lot of sport coaches to shit on Goda, and I was like, I have no idea what Goda is. I just like read about it recently. Somebody posted a football coach posted it about it, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. What is this?
mhm,
Right? Or like try different training modality for 3 months. Try different diet style for 3 months. Like if you've been curious about carnivore, do it for 3 months, four
mhm,
months, right? Don't rely on other people's experiences to speak for you. I think is the kind of overarching theme here.
mhm.
It's like, create your own experience and draw your own conclusions from it and tie it into, the research rabbit hole if you want, right? And this is coming from someone who like I don't call
Nice.
myself a science-based
Yeah,
lifter or anything like that, even though I'm probably more science-based than
yeah,
most of these others. But I think that because of that, we've underplayed the idea of personal experience. But when it comes to health and fitness, you need to try it. Just try it.
I like that.
Don't be afraid to try
I like that. I wanted to thank you for your time. This was usually calls go for like an hour. This went,
it.
well over and all the stuff. I was having such a great time. And also,
Same
I
here, man.
normally I look at my notes throughout to try to like pace everything, and we probably went like an hour before I looked at my notes and all that stuff. This is great. If you want to plug yourself, your business, any of that stuff before we hang up, please do.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at Ishan, Ishan .Hewa on Instagram, and my business is Jupiter Athletics. Yeah, I do health and fitness coaching slash, consulting, things like supplements, stuff like that.
Do you mind me asking why Jupiter? How you pick the name?
So as a kid, I was super into space.
Okay.
Like I had a telescope. I thought I was actually I thought at that time my career choice was going to be an astronomer or an
Okay.
astrophysicist.
Okay, cool.
Like I'm not joking on that, but
That's cool.
I was terrible at math. I do not have the math skills, but yeah, I'm fascinated by all things space, and I was like, yeah, this would be cool.
Uh,
Eventually, I was like, yeah, I can make t-shirts or something, some cool graphic shirts in the future for my
yeah.
business and stuff. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that'd be
that's
awesome.
kind of
Cool. Well, Ishan, thank you very much for your time. I had a blast.
thank you, man. I
Thanks.
appreciate it. And it's great to finally meet you, Matt.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Thank you.